So working with things like SAS and less, you are able to build your own libraries of styles. But building one is actually a pretty intense undertaking. It's not necessarily something I expect you to do in this class. Rather, it's much more important that you know how to go out and grab some of the more famous pre-built style libraries. These are usually called style frameworks or front-end web frameworks because they mostly deal with the front end that the user is looking at. And there's some very famous examples of these out there. Now these are, again, just libraries of styles. They're collections of pre-made web code that make it easy to design a nice-looking page very quickly, and also make it easy to keep your design consistent from page to page, which is largely what we want to be able to do. They're usually made of reusable components that you can pull in how you see fit, much the same way you would design a graphical user interface when you're making a more traditional program. They will always leverage CSS, and sometimes they use a little bit of JavaScript as well to make sure that they can do some of the more advanced things that aren't possible with just CSS. You'll also find they're often written in one of these style languages like less or SAS, because these are usually very big things, and therefore they require a little more programmatic of an approach, and you can't just do them with pure CSS. So, let's talk about a few famous examples. Obviously, I've kind of got one staring us in the face right here. This is Bootstrap. Bootstrap was made by Twitter back in the day. It used to be called Twitter Bootstrap. It's sitting at version 3.4 now, and version 4 is well on its way, will soon be available. It was previously written in less, and then when they got to version 3, they switched to SAS. And version 4 is going to completely drop the less and only make it available in SAS. So everything that we just learned about SAS would actually be applicable to Bootstrap if you wanted to use it. Another very famous one that's gaining popularity is called Google Materialize. As you could guess, this is Google's own web style framework. Material design was something that Google coined, and it has to do with the way that they design the look and feel of their user applications. So when you use Android, or if you use any of the Google tools like Gmail, Google Docs, or those such programs, you're working with what is called material design. And the Materialize CSS framework is meant to realize those design ideas. Lastly, one that's really simple and a bit programmer-centric is called W3.css. This is the one that's used on the W3 Schools website, and it's a very straightforward one to use. It's often not as pretty as the previous two, but it's also much simpler in the design decisions that it makes. Let's take a look real quick at these three different ones. First, starting with Materialize. This is at materializecss.com. And you can read all about this and the way it works and all the different features it offers. By and large, what you will find with all of this, let's see if we go over to the showcase, if we can see what some of these things look like. Here are some web pages that make use of this. Let's see what we can do here. What's one of these that looks like it might be really interesting? Mako, I kind of remember that. And so you can see here, this is a very sort of style-heavy website. Mako is itself a PHP framework, and so it's using Materialize to present the things that it is, which is very cool. And all the different bits and pieces to all of this. Now we're over, looks like, onto GitHub's website here, but you get the idea. This is something that gives you a whole lot of tools to make things that are much more, have a consistent style to them. There's also W3 CSS. Let me see here. There's a really good example that's around here somewhere. So let's try going into this. Demo 1. This is their W3 CSS. Notice the nav bar that stays glued to the top. All the different sort of central articles here that have particular it's like menus with prices on them and descriptions. This is a very nicely styled little web page here. And let's go back again. Let's see what other styles they offer. Demo 2. And so here is the menu, and you can scroll through different tabs here. This is a tabbed interface. Nice font work going on here. It's a very pleasing looking web page. And then let's go back again. Demo 3. See what else we've got. Wedding website. You can see here it's actually going through each of these as we're going through all of this stuff. The wedding, back up to home, back down to RSVP. So here we have the nav bar kind of down at the bottom, and you'll notice it's a little bit see-through. All of this is done with CSS. Let's see here. Let's look at the last one here too. Oh, I clicked, so I have to back up more. Let's get through all the clicks. Oh, no, it's opened in its own tab. The last one is Bootstrap. Bootstrap itself offers probably what is the oldest and most trusted of these frameworks. It offers theming, so you can get specific themes. There's a bunch of examples over here for this as well. But we're going to get really deep into Bootstrap because it's the one that I'm going to teach you, being the one that's probably the most popular. They certainly claim it is the most popular HTML, CSS, and JavaScript framework. So we'll see lots more about this down the road here. But I wanted to just sort of introduce you to these. All of these will work differently, but they'll all be built around the same principle. You link in a CSS file and possibly a JavaScript file, and then from that are some predefined classes that you can apply to different divs and spans inside your code to make them behave like common widgets, like callout boxes, dialog boxes, special text boxes. Here we see a tooltip, here we see tabs, progress bars, all sorts of common things that you might want to use in a modern front-end development environment. So let's keep moving forward through all of this. When you use one of these frameworks, as I mentioned, you just need to link in the pre-made CSS. This is usually compiled from SAS, but it's already pre-compiled for you. All you have to do is link it in. And then very often there'll also be a JavaScript file that's involved as well, because there's some things that CSS just can't do. You then go through and you tag up your page with the proper classes. And to know what those classes are, you simply have to look through the documentation for these frameworks. We'll be digging into that quite a bit as we move forward with Bootstrap, so you'll see how that works. But each of these frameworks you could learn how to use just by looking through what the particular classes are, how they need to be structured, and how you use them all together. It's very similar to how we used the little tooltip library that we got off of the W3 Schools website. You very often have to break down the structure of your entire page into very specific divs or span elements and give them the proper classes in order for the effects to work the way that's intended. So you have to get used to how to structure your page a little bit differently from what we've been doing up until now. But once you're used to making a page for, say, Bootstrap, you'll follow that same pattern no matter how you create it. Once you do this, all of the different consistency of look, all the different advanced features that I've mentioned here, and advanced user interface elements will become easily achievable and available to you. Now, we're going to go through all of this when we work with Bootstrap directly. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about one of the features that all of these frameworks try to achieve, and that is something called responsive design. Now, you've probably heard this term before. I believe it comes up briefly in the book as you were reading through exactly what responsive design is. Ultimately, this is the idea that we sometimes view the web on screens that are very different, and the biggest one of those is probably on your mobile phone. You use browsers on there all the time. If you're on an iPhone of some sort, like these are here, you're going to use the mobile Safari, the iOS browser. If you're on Android, you're probably using Chrome. That is the default browser that comes with it. Both of those also have the option to install Firefox or Opera, and you can browse the web with those. But these web browsers are specifically designed to take a web page and show it on a very different sort of screen. This screen that I'm on right now is very wide. We would say it has a landscape orientation. And I presume you are on one like that as well. You're probably on your laptop. If you aren't, if you're viewing this on a phone or a tablet, you probably are holding this the other way so that it is in landscape orientation. But phones are often held this way, in a portrait orientation, where it has a lot of space top to bottom, but very little side to side. This becomes a challenge. The other thing that's important is that a phone takes up very little of your field of view compared to a desktop monitor or a TV that takes up a lot more. It also depends on how close you hold it. If you had it right up next to your face, it would take up more, but then you'd start to see the pixels. So there's all kinds of trade-offs that have to happen between here. And what the web has really learned is that you have to treat these different situations differently. Mobile web browsers are going to have a smaller screen. They're going to have less processing power. They're going to have a lot less memory available to them. And consequently, at least historically, people decided to make mobile web pages completely separately from the main web pages. So they felt they needed to be different. And so I will make two copies of my website, one that's intended for desktop applications and one that's intended just to be viewed when you're on a mobile phone. And it would sense which one you're on. It would show you the particular one that is intended for your device. Many places still do this. You will find when you go out to open up a web page on your phone, it shows you something completely different than what you see when you're on the desktop. Because of this, most modern phones even offer to request the desktop page. Basically, they lie to the server and say, hey, I'm actually a desktop, give me the regular one. And sometimes that works, but usually it doesn't. It's usually so tiny that you can't really work with it. So, how do we handle this? Do we just simply serve the same content to both, or do we need to be smarter about it? As I said, the old approach is to not serve the same content. We have two entirely different work paths. That's difficult from a maintenance standpoint because whoever is maintaining the website has to change both of them in sync and make sure that they both stay fully up to date. So this last question, can we simply serve the same content? It would be a lot nicer from a maintenance standpoint if we could. And this is exactly what responsive design aims to achieve. So, with responsive web design, you use clever CSS and JavaScript to reorient and redraw the page depending on how much space you have, so that it'll look right when you're on a smaller phone's page, and it'll look right when you're on a larger page. So dynamically, it rearranges itself on the particular screen size available. This is also advantageous in that you don't have to predict all the different screen sizes that might be viewed on. As long as you try and handle them all dynamically, even future devices that we haven't thought of yet might work with this. Now, there's always limits. You can only go so small, and once you start going really big, you might no longer be able to take advantage of all that extra space. But within a certain spectrum, even new devices ought to be able to be supported if you do this correctly. So, the content itself won't just get smaller, because then it would be harder to read. If it's on your phone and it just gets smaller and smaller, it starts to go below the threshold of what you can actually make out. It needs to stay the same size but be properly rearranged so that it's all presented in a reasonable way. So this is most often done by taking things that were side-by-side elements and changing them to be top to bottom for appropriate viewing on a long screen. So basically, you have one version of your web page, you make sure to use responsive web design practices, and then it can be displayed on any of the common devices that users might use nowadays without modification. It dynamically changes itself to fit the situation. Let's take a look at this. All of these different web pages we've been looking at are in fact responsive. All of the web sort of libraries that we've described, Bootstrap, W3.css, and Materialize, and many other ones, all aim to support this. But right now, I'm going to focus on Bootstrap, being the one that we will be carrying forward here. So I'm looking at this page right now in a fairly wide web browser on my desktop computer. It's got plenty of space available to it. But it isn't always going to have this. I could also visit this on a phone or on a tablet and see what happens. In order to simulate that, I'm going to open up the developer tools. Now, let me switch over to Google Chrome here. Give myself a new window. And I want to take this out of full screen. I'm going to go to the Get Bootstrap website. It's getbootstrap.com is the website you go to open that up. And I want to open this up in the developer tools. You can do this, I believe, by going View, Developer, Developer Tools, or you can right-click anywhere and say Inspect. That's always an easy way to do it. And the developer tools are probably going to pop up to the right. And this gives you the ability to explore deeper into this. We've looked at this briefly before. As we get further and further into JavaScript, this particular developer tools environment is going to become really important. One thing that's really nice about the Chrome developer tools is it allows you to simulate other screen types really quickly and easily. So let's go over here, and this right here is the device toolbar. If I click this, it now moves into a particular device size. First, let's start here. Let's go, if we do responsive, then it can actually be resized, I believe, so I can size it up as big as I want. Let's start out nice and big. So this is close to what it was before, and you know what it looked like here, like that. Now let's take this down all the way to the size of, let's do an iPhone 6. Boom. Here's what we're looking at now. And it even tries to make it draggable, so you see that it kind of becomes a touch environment. What happened here? Well, everything kind of crunched down and became smaller, but the Bootstrap logo and the text did not. Let's go back to responsive again, where we're looking at this. You'll notice here it shows you how big each of these things really is. We're into laptop large here is kind of where we are. As we go down one step, let's go down to the standard laptop. Already it's starting to crunch things in a little bit. You'll notice that particularly the bar up at the top got a little bit smaller. If we go down again, the bar starts to stack a little bit because it's getting small enough that it can't show it all at once. We keep going. Now we come into tablet land. What we're on here is sort of the standard tablet width. And something big happened. The toolbar up here at the top compressed down into a button you have to press to access it. You've probably seen this button before, but you might not know what it's called. It's often called the hamburger button because it looks like a hamburger. This is a common trick. You no longer have the ability to list them all side to side because there's too many things, so you put them all inside of a menu button, and when you press that, it presents all the different bits and pieces. Bootstrap does that for you automatically. Other things you might have noticed. Let's go down a little bit. Notice here we have these three things stacked top to bottom that are sort of a list of cool features that are supported by Bootstrap. You might not remember, but before, when we were on a wider design, they were side by side, each of those elements. But as soon as it gets too small to do that effectively anymore, boom, it switches them to being top to bottom. And now they are sort of getting smaller to respond to the device as the device gets smaller and smaller. And like I mentioned before, there are limits. Eventually you'll get so small that it just doesn't work anymore. Here we are on a small mobile phone. Let's go medium mobile phone, which is like probably, this is about as small as any modern smartphone ever gets anymore. And a large mobile phone would be the sort of plus phablet type phones that we're getting nowadays. Bootstrap does all of this for you automatically as long as you're using it correctly. It makes setting up this kind of responsive sort of web page very easy, as do all of these other environments that I've talked about. Keep in mind, too, the power of this device toolbar. If you turn this on, you now have the ability to look at some predefined things, like here's iPad Pro, which is kind of cool. And you can even go down to iPhone 6, iPhone 6 Plus, which gets even bigger. And it attempts to emulate these things as effectively as possible. You can rotate into landscape mode if you prefer to view what it's going to look like on that. All in all, this gives you a very effective way to see what it would look like on a phone, even if it's one you don't have. So, this is responsive design, and this is one of the key reasons we like to work with something like Bootstrap, because it provides us responsive design out of the box. It makes it very easy to achieve that. So, our next step is to actually learn a little bit about Bootstrap, try and create some of it ourselves.